and sweet. Talk about how we got here to the new supplemental guide / implementation guide for FDA. FDA did publish a final rule in the Federal Register towards the beginning of December 2016, which was then effective 30 days after the publication date in the Federal Register. It did, in part, require the submission of certain data elements in the automated commercial environment for FDA for those entries that were transmitted electronically for FDA-regulated products. In addition to the various data element requirements for FDA at the time of importation, it also revised various sections of FDA regulations, one being the clarification on the owner or consignee portion within 21 CFR, the second dealing with who FDA is required to submit notices of action to within the entry entities, and 3 allows us from a regulatory perspective to reject entries that are incomplete and or inaccurate at the time of submission to FDA. I do want to thank those who participated in the pilot leading up to full implementation for FDA within the ACE world in the middle of 2016 on July 23rd. We strongly encourage from both FDA and CBP trade to continue to refine their business systems and processes for a more orderly and effective and efficient transmission of entry information to the various partner government agencies. We do see and have seen historically since the rollout of ACE many benefits to trade. If nothing else, requiring accurate and complete information up front means that it is less follow-up that FDA has to do and or less time it takes FDA to query our own systems to verify compliance with the various requirements. So, like I said, we do very much appreciate the effort and collaboration within the pilot and moving forward. We are transitioning from ACE facilitation, since it's already in place, that is a system of record, to how can we make ACE a better experience for everyone, not just CBP and FDA, but trade as well. To that end, there will be continued outreach from the FDA perspective that we're putting together, both for our own field staff as well as for trade. And I think that's probably enough for me for this time. I will be on the line. I'll be working with Jessica, but I will turn it over to her, and we will both be answering questions as well. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Apologize for the technical difficulties getting this up and running. Hope everyone's doing well. Despite the delays, hopefully we can give you some good information that's going to help you over the next couple weeks when some of the new requirements are deployed, so you can avoid getting rejects and continue on with a smooth transition in ACE. So first and foremost, we'll get started with our regular status update. So just to let you know, since August of 2015, we've processed almost 7 million entries, 6.7 and 34 million lines, and the purpose of the webinar today is to review the changes to our supplemental guide, which will be deployed on February 9th. That's next Thursday between 6 and 7 a.m. And we will answer your questions about the things that will be deployed and provide any other clarity on requirements. So before we jump into the specific by commodity changes, just a couple of changes that impact multiple commodities and multiple products. The first one, the importer of record contact information. So for all FDA lines, except for items that require prior notice, the importer of record contact information is required. So the name, email, and a phone number for the importer of record will be required for each FDA line, unless it's a food, processed food, natural state, feed, anything that has prior notice, those are exempt from this requirement. Another big change for February 19th, and the next two things that I'm going to speak about are really for the software vendors and how they send certain codes. Basically, when you're sending contact information in the PG19 and PG21 records, when contact information is mandatory, the PG19 and the PG21 codes must match. And we can review some samples of that at the end of this presentation. Basically, for something like the importer of record, when you're required to give contact information, the PG19 must have the code for importer of record FD1, and the PG21 must also have the same code, FD1. If you're sending the contact information for the prior notice submitter and the prior notice transmitter, the codes in both of those records must match. PG19, PG21, both must have a PNS, and when you're sending the PNT, both must have a PNT. So if you're a software vendor, hopefully you've adjusted accordingly. I will advise, we were made aware that the CERT environment has a bug for this rule. So if you're still sending it the old way, where you're sending maybe a prior notice submitter in the PG19 record, but you're sending a PK in the PG21 record, it's letting you send the mismatch and it's not rejecting. That's something that they're working on, and we'll try to update you when it gets fixed. Again, I have some examples that we'll go through at the end of the presentation. And then we discussed those mandatory contact information, importer records, prior notice submitter, prior notice transmitter. There's an optional contact information, and that's the filer. So we're highly encouraging you to transmit information for the filer. I put the code here, PK, for the software vendors. But if you're a filer, ask your software vendor, am I sending my contact information? The reason FDA is asking for the filer contact information is because if you give us the importer of record or you give us the manufacturer's contact information, we may not be able to get a quick answer on something that can help expedite us processing the entry. So that's why we're asking for filer contact information. Okay, moving into the specific requirements for different products. First, we'll review changes for biologics. So for biologics, if you're filing that type of product, the product code first two numbers must start with 57. So any biologic filed as bio must start with product code 57. Next, previously in our supplemental guide, there was a processing code for biologics regulated devices. And these were biologic products regulated by CBER, but they may have been a medical device, and they may have had affirmations like IDE, the investigational device, or PM #, the pre-market information. All of that information has been taken out of the biologics section. It can no longer be filed under BIO. It should be filed, if it has that information, it should be filed under the medical device chapter. And because that was changed, there were some intended use codes for those biologic regulated devices that have been removed. Another clarification that a software vendor brought this to our attention last week. So this is something new besides what we put in the CSMS. And I'm not sure if it's clear in the change log, but we had a question from some vendors who were testing this last week. So for the biologics intended use code, if you're looking at that in the supplemental guide, it would be row 7 and row 8. We have the processing code for HCT, human cells and tissues. We have the intended use code 082.000, and it appears that there's two contradictory requirements, that for this processing code and this intended use code, either HCT is required or HRN. So for this intended use code, there's actually two separate scenarios. And so if you're programming this as a software vendor, just know that you need to send either or. So if you're sending 082.001, make either or mandatory, not both, so they either need to send one or the other. Okay, that's really the changes for biologics. So moving on to the next chapter in our guide is cosmetics. There wasn't any major changes to cosmetics, but just for clarification purposes, if you're filing a cosmetic product, it must start with industry code 50 or 53. If you're filing a cosmetic, there are no applicable intended use codes, so you can leave that field blank, intended use not required for cosmetics. And then just another point of clarification, we've seen some filers that are attempting to file drug products or even medical device products as a cosmetic. If it has a drug listing number, a national drug code, or any affirmations of compliance that would indicate it's a medical device or drug product, that means it's not a cosmetic. So only file cosmetics ending in 50 or 50, beginning with 50 or 53 as a cosmetic. Moving on, requirements for human drugs. Similarly to the other products, we have now restrictions based on the type of drug product that it is for the product code. So we list the industry codes which are applicable. Brand name was previously required. It is becoming optional, but we still encourage, if you know the brand name, go ahead and transmit that information. The biggest change for human drugs is updates to the intended use code. So if you are used to filing prescription human drug products, the code that you probably used all the time was 080.000, which was prescription drug product for human use. That code is gone. So the first code that was replaced is here, 080.012. That's for prescription drug products that are subject of an approved application, abbreviated NDA, or Biologics license application, BLA. Anything that's circled red here is new. So if you're an importer of drug products or you're a filer who files a lot of these products, just pay attention to these intended use codes. We also have the last one for other use. If you're filing a drug product and nothing really seems to fit, you can definitely reach out to FDA for clarification, but this code 980.000 was added if the scenario that you're importing isn't elsewhere classified in any one of these intended use codes. And the Center for Drugs highly encourages that you take the time to select the appropriate intended use code. They've really laid out a scenario for each import scenario, and they even give you this for other use if you're not seeing the exact scenario. And rather than providing an unknown intended use code, they encourage you to look through this list. If you're a filer, talk with your importer and determine which would be the correct intended use code. And then a point on those changes, those couple of things that changes, because the actual code changed, that means the logic for what would be required also changed. So before, if you were using an old code, it may have triggered the drug registration, the drug listing, the drug application. If you're filing a prescription product for consumer use, those things will still be required, but just because of the new numbered code, it would just be a new trigger for what it's asking you to transmit. I see a lot of questions coming in. I will try to work with AJ after I go through the slides to revisit the question. If you have a question about a specific slide, just put that in your question number, and as we're going through the questions at the end, I can go back and revisit that slide. Okay, moving on to food. Any of the prior notice requirements remain unchanged by the ACE final rule. All of that stuff is the same, so you won't see a great deal of changes in the food section. We did clearly annotate the product code, industry codes for the different types of food. When you registered for the webinar, you could write a question, and we saw a ton of questions come in about what intended use code am I supposed to be selecting for food. So intended use code is optional for food, And there are only 3 choices, one if it's for research food, one if it's for research animal feed, and one if it's for personal use. So if it applies to any of that, you can select it, but if it doesn't apply, if it's just commercial food going to some type of distributor, it's not for research, it's not going to a person's home as a small personal shipment, you don't need to select an intended use code. So again, commercial shipments, no intended use code is required. Moving on to the next commodity type, tobacco. For tobacco, the product code must start with industry code 98. Previously, the brand name was required for most tobacco. Now, the tobacco brand name is only required if it's for consumer use, and you would tell us that by selecting the consumer use intended use code. Apart from all of the regular data, the entity information, the product code, etc., affirmations of compliance are optional, so there's not much additional data that's required for tobacco. Moving on to medical devices, the product code must start with an industry code that's within the range of 73 to 92. And one change for their chapter, previously if you were submitting UNK unknown as an intended use code, it disrupted the logic for what affirmations would be required, and the system didn't require any affirmations. If you select UNK, you must, starting February 9th, have a device registration number, device foreign exporter registration, and device listing number, and that's a way for us to encourage you to obtain the correct intended use code. So if you're a filer or courier, please work with the importer to obtain this information. If they don't have a device registration or listing or device foreign exporter registration, it may be because they fall into a different import scenario. So again, take a look at the correct intended use and import scenario and choose appropriately. We discourage you from just using UNK as a blanket data element. Next, requirements for radiation emitting products. There weren't many changes for this. The product code must start with industry code 94 to 97 for any type of rad emitting product. Next, commodity type is animal drug. So previously, animal drug chapter did not have a lot of mandatory information. Intended use codes were not mandatory, and it wasn't clear what affirmation of compliance were required for animal drugs versus animal devices. So specifically for animal drugs, we follow the same format as human drugs. So we tell you what product codes are allowed. We list intended use codes and have an appropriate situation, import scenario for each import that you would be bringing it in. So intended use is required for animal drugs, and then based on the intended use code, based on this numbered code, you can see what affirmations are required. And noted similar to human drugs, because the intended use codes were updated, the affirmations of compliance were also updated. If it's an animal drug that required a registration and an application, probably still does, but just you may be using a different intended use code. So for the software vendors, if they have that type of validation, you would know which affirmations to enforce. And then requirements for animal devices. So main requirement for devices is the product code that starts with industry code 68 only. And intended use codes and affirmations of compliance at this time are not required for animal devices. So now I have 2 slides for the software vendors. This is basically just how the message set data is sent. So if you're a filer and you're wondering what are these codes, don't worry about it. These next two slides are really for the software vendors. So the first slide shows a sample, a layman's term sample. Obviously it's not in the grid format, left justified, but just a quick sample of how the PG19 and PG21 contact information should be sent. So this is a sample for prior notice. So for prior notice, there's always 7 entities that are required. So here's the 7 entities. For prior notice, the only PG21s that are required are for the prior notice submitter and for the prior notice transmitter. As I mentioned, the FD1 importer of record contact information is only required for non-prior notice items. If you wanted to send an FD1 PG21, you could, but it's not requirement. What's reflected on this slide reflects the mandatory requirement and how the information should be sent. As I mentioned, there is an issue in the certification environment if you're already testing this. If you're testing with like a prior notice submitter and a PK and then a prior notice transmitter and a PK, right now it's not rejecting, but that's going to be fixed. If you're sending multiple PKs or if you're sending something that doesn't match when it's mandatory, you would get a reject. So we're going to try to get that fixed insert as soon as possible so you can properly test it before next week. And then I also have a quick sample of how data should be sent for the non-prior notice line. So for most other commodities, there's 4 entities that are required: manufacturer, shipper, importer, delivered to party. For these entities, the only one that has a mandatory contact information is the FD1. And so when you send that, the PG19 and the PG21 code must both say FD1. No other code is accepted unless you're sending an additional. After you send the FD1, you can repeat PG21 and then send a PK, but you at least have to have the FD1 there. So just talking about PK, which is the filer's contact information, you have 2 options for how you would send that. I gave you a sample here, like if you want to send it under the delivered to party every time, you can do that. That's the time it doesn't match, when it's a PK and it's not mandatory. Or you can send the 3 records, PG19, PG20, PG21, with the code PK. So that's up to you. That's just a sample. Again, not working properly in CERT now, but we've requested that this gets fixed as soon as possible. And then moving on to some of the questions that you all sent when you registered for the webinar. One frequently asked question is still the topic of DUNS versus FEI numbers. So question, does FDA want DUNS numbers or FEI numbers? So as you all know, what's mandatory for the entities is name and address. And then you have an option to either submit a DUNS or an FEI. You can send whatever you want. But the instruction from FDA and FDA's preference is that if it's a medical device or a biologic, those type of products, most of them have a registration number that's an FEI. So they encourage you to send an FEI number because that's something that they actually assign. So they have a higher confidence that if you're submitting an FEI, it's the one they assigned, it's probably correct. Using that may help expedite your entry and us reviewing that. And then if it's a drug product, drug registration numbers are DUNS numbers, so they encourage DUNS numbers. And if it's any other type of product, food, tobacco, etc., we encourage DUNS numbers because we have the DUNS portal that you can go in and look up the DUNS number for each site-specific location. Next question that came in when you guys registered. For the importer of record contact information, can we list a general email and phone number, or does it have to be for one specific individual? So the importer of record can either be a person or it can be a corporation. So you can list a general email for your office, a general phone number, but please don't make it a spam email that if we're sending information or notice of action to the importer of record via electronic means that no one's going to notice it. Just make sure whatever you give us, that's what we're going to contact you on. So please make sure that it's a valid email that someone or multiple people have access to and check regularly. Next question, we got a bunch of questions about device foreign exporter. If you have additional questions that we're not covering, I know this is a popular topic, email ACE support and we'll loop you in for the Center for Medical Devices and try to get a specific answer for your questions. But these are two questions that we received. Are there exceptions for the device foreign exporter when a foreign manufactured device the U.S. for recycling or reprocessing? So if it's specifically coming in for reprocessing, either a single-use device or multi-use device, we do have intended use codes for that. And that scenario would not require a device foreign exporter. If you're not sure about the scenario, if you're not sure if it's coming in for reprocessing or repair, or you're not sure, try to get as much information from the importer and email ACE support. Again, we'll link you with our Center for Medical Devices and our Division of Import Operations and to try to determine what the correct scenario is and what requirements would be for that scenario. Next, is the device foreign exporter required for U.S. goods returned? So when U.S. goods returned are coming in for refund or overstock to the manufacturer, device foreign exporter is not required. If the original manufacturer, however, is not a U.S. firm, that means they're not U.S. goods returned. So the device foreign exporter would be required in that scenario. Again, I know a lot of these questions are complex and may relate to a very specific situation for your firm and your supply chain. So if you're not sure, if you're not totally sure, reach out to ACE support and we'll link you with the Center for Medical Devices to try to determine the requirements for your specific scenario. Next question that we had, and we see this somewhat frequently, when you're transmitting the manufacturer address, are we supposed to provide the corporate headquarters information for the company, or are we supposed to provide the exact physical location of where the product was produced? So FDA defines a manufacturer as a site-specific location where the product is manufactured and where the product last went a substantial transformation. So we'd be looking for the site-specific location. Next, we had a couple questions that came in regarding quantity and requesting a sample of how quantity should be submitted. So even though quantity is optional, we still encourage you to transmit that information because it can help us in our review process. So each level of packaging should be transmitted, largest to smallest. Each product type has their own specific units of measure. So, you know, something like a medical device isn't going to have fluoride ounces as a unit of measure. So make sure for whatever commodity that you're filing, you know exactly what units of measure are applicable. And then here's two examples. For medical devices, something that's coming in 200 cartons, 6 boxes, 8 pieces in each box. You go from largest to smallest, 200 cartons, 6 boxes in each carton, 8 pieces in each box, and the last unit is a base unit. We say only one base unit is allowed. Some people got that confused thinking that only one unit of measure is allowed. There's a difference between unit of measure and base unit. Base unit is just that last level. So we wouldn't want you to give us pieces and then pieces again. We just want you to give us the base unit once. And then an example for food, 100 cases of, let's say, mineral water, 24 bottles in each box, 16 ounces in each bottle. So 100 cases, 24 bottles, 16 ounces. Another frequently asked question, is UNK still allowed? We sent a CSMS about this, I think, last week. It is still allowed, but it's not allowed for other data elements besides intended use code. So before you could put UNK for the brand name, you don't need to do that anymore. Before you could put UNK as an affirmation of compliance if you didn't know it. You can't do that anymore. You'll get a reject starting February 9th. UNK is only allowed for intended use code. You can use it for any type of product, but we highly discourage you from using this. Most of the logic for our requirement is based on intended use code. So if you're actually choosing an intended use code and giving us correct information, we know what affirmations of compliance are required. When an entry reviewer at the port is looking at that information, they say, okay, I can see why they didn't send this, why they sent this, and they have more information and able to make their admissibility decision. And then a couple of resources. We talked about DUNS numbers versus FEI numbers. Here are the links. First link is for the DUNS number. If you would like to get a DUNS number for free, or if you'd like to look up a DUNS number to see if you have one, the website is www.fdadunsLookup.com. And for medical devices, the Center for Medical Devices has a public registration and listing database where you can click on the link that's listed here. You can either type in the firm's registration number or the firm's name or a couple other variables, and once you type that in, you can see the firm's information and the firm's FEI number. So if you're filing medical devices, that's a very helpful link so you can submit the correct FEI number. And then lastly, hopefully most of you are familiar with these resources. If you have questions about a specific ACE entry, the data requirements for that entry, if you're having a reject, if you're trying to send a correction, if you're getting a reject from CBP and you can't get your entry to be transmitted and you need help, we have a 24/7 help desk, ACE score support at fda.hhs.gov, and there's the toll-free phone number. And if you just have some general questions about is a product subject to FDA for things like temporary in-bond, STV, can it be disclaimed, HTS codes, stuff like that, you can contact our Division of Import Operations at FDA Imports Inquiry at fda.hhs.gov. Also, if your firm is struggling or you just want a review of the specific requirements for a certain commodity, you can reach out to those email addresses as well to request some further outreach, to request a small webinar for a specific group of people, and we'll try to accommodate that as best as we can. So that's the information. I tried to extract it from the supplemental guide and put it in a couple of slides so it was easier for everyone. But if anyone has specific questions about a page in the supplemental guide, I have that and I could pull it open. But at this time, AJ and I can start going through the questions and making sure that we provide a clarification and answering anything else you have.
And I will say, I have been acting as Frank, answering some of your questions throughout the presentation while Jessica's been speaking. I don't think I got him in too much trouble, but certainly if there's additional questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box and Jessica and I can address. We've got a lot of questions about, is a copy of the presentation available and or the supplemental guide? That information is available on the left-hand side of your screen. There is a pod that says today's presentation, and there are at least a handful of files there that can be downloaded.
The link to the supplemental guide on cbp.gov was also provided in the CSMS message.
I saw a question and it disappeared, but it was asking about, oh, here it is. Some FEI numbers are more than 9 characters. Has this changed? So it's okay if their FEI number is more than 9 characters. Actually, DUNS numbers are the number that is only 9 characters. If it's an FEI number, I believe we have it listed, and I'm double checking here. It can be between 4 and 10 numbers. If you're experiencing something that's less than that or greater than that, let us know, but FEIs are between 4 and 10. Someone asked, what should we do about email addresses that are too long for the field? So we also have a record called the PG60, and it's basically a carryover of any data element that you don't have enough room for. So for like email address or address, if you don't have enough room, hopefully that's something that your software vendor has programmed or is currently working on. So if something like an email is too long, they can transmit the full email address to us.
Another couple of questions related to value. And if it's a negative, I presume that this is asked in the context, are the articles more likely to be held if FDA value is not reported? And the answer is no, not necessarily. There are many risk factors taken into determination, in the determination, whether to have the system release a product or force the entry to manual review. FDA value is not part of the admissibility determination for a product, thus is not in the final rule as such or in the new IG as such. However, I will say that if FDA may have questions about the value throughout the entire admissibility process, if a line is held and we do want to conduct further field investigation or examination of the product, we do need the value prior to setting up work on that line electronically. That's one of our system rules. So while we do encourage the transmission of optional data, it is not a required field, nor does it cause the product to be held any more often than not.
Someone's asking what the appropriate intended use code for sunglasses. So sunglasses are a medical device, so they would be under the program code DEV. Based on what type of product it is doesn't tell me the intended use, because sunglasses could be coming in for anything. They could be coming into a lab for testing. They could be coming import for export. You would need to talk to your importer about what the scenario is. But if they're going to like a distributor to be sold, then the appropriate and to be used, then the appropriate intended use code would be 081.001. And that's a medical device for consumer use, standard import. Other people are asking, can we have a copy of the presentation, and will the supplemental guide be available before the implementation date? Yes, the supplemental guide is already on cbp.gov. If you just Google FDA Supplemental Guide, it should come up. Or you can email ACE Support and ask for the document version. That's easier to read than a PDF. So if you don't have a copy, email ACE Support. We'll get you a copy.
And it's also available on the left-hand side in a pod entitled Today's Presentation. So there's many forums or ways you can get the document. We've got a few questions. Go ahead.
Someone is asking if they have packaging, if they have a line where the packaging is completely different, like they have boxes that are all different sizes, do they need to break it up into separate FDA lines, or should they just pick one of the sizes and submit that for quantity? AJ?
Oh, sorry, I was looking at a different question. What was that? What was the question?
If they have a line that has different types of packaging and quantity, they're asking, should they just pick one quantity and just submit that, or do they need to break it into separate lines?
That would then equate to multiple lines being transmitted for that product.
Someone's asking, for the medical device, is the FEI number and the DEV, the device registration, the same number? Oftentimes, yes, they are the same number. Not always, but oftentimes, yes.
We've gotten a couple questions about specific harmonized tariff codes and the FD flag associated with that. Tariff codes are a function of CBP, not FDA. Thus, FDA, local, or headquarters staff should not be advising trade on the most appropriate HTS code for their article. That being said, you may submit a request to FDA to look at a change for an FD flag on an active harmonized tariff schedule code. And I will provide the email addresses in the chat box here for those individuals within FDA who would deal with such FD flag submissions for requests of change.
There was a follow-up question about the sunglasses. Again, we can't tell, FDA doesn't tell you what the intended use is. You have to talk to your importer and ask them what the intended use is and who it's going to. If it's going for distribution and consumer use, then the intended use code is 081.001, standard import of a device, medical device for consumer use. Someone's asking, what is the intended use code for green coffee beans? As I mentioned on the slide, food does not require an intended use code. If it's a special situation where it's coming in for research, you can let us know that by that intended use code, but otherwise you don't need an intended use code for green coffee beans. People are also asking, what is the FEI number? FEI number is a unique identification. It stands for Firm Establishment ID number, and that's something that for certain products FDA assigns. AJ, I'm not sure if you can help me with this one. It says, are medical device prototypes subject to FDA?
Probably not. We would have to pitch that over to our subject matter experts at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. I don't know at what point it officially becomes an article under our jurisdiction.
Other people are asking, where can we find the updated list of intended use codes? That's in our supplemental guide in each chapter. If you're looking for one list, you can email support. We did send one out after the December webinar. So if you need that, if you're a software vendor, you want to use that table, email support.
We saw a question leading into the webinar as well as here about the record-keeping requirements for the importer, I presume importer of record, who distributes various products. And not being the record-keeping expert for FDA, I would suggest going on FDA.gov to look at the record-keeping requirements for a facility specific to the product that you are bringing in. I know CDP has their own record-keeping requirements. And there are various record-keeping requirements for FDA depending on the commodity.
Someone asked, is the right version of the supplemental guide 2.5, December 28, 2016? Yes, that's the correct version. Someone also called me out for having an incorrect sample for the quantity for food. Yes, I have some typos. It should say 100 cases, 24 bottles, 16 ounces. I accidentally have the word carton in there, so that's not correct. So I'll update the presentation before I send it out. So someone again followed up with sunglasses. Are sunglasses a medical device? Yes.
We saw the question beforehand leading into the webinar as well as here. Is there a chart or other document showing the harmonized tariff schedule codes with updated FDA flags? Yes, I believe that is kept by CBP. We can certainly find the appropriate follow-up point of contact within CBP. However, they keep the active list of HTS codes with all of the partner government agency flags.
Someone's asking about the PK. It says the supplemental guide shows PK per entry line, but the presentation says there's only one PK per FDA line, which is correct. So the supplemental guide is at the FDA line level. All of FDA's instructions are at the FDA line level. So there's only one filer contact information allowed for the FDA line. I'm still seeing a ton of questions about different sunglass scenarios, where it's frames or stuff for research or a lot of sunglass situations. So email ACE support and we'll work with you, but most likely they are going to require FDA. Someone else is asking for ACE support, so I'm going to go back to that slide. Here it is, ACE_support at fda.hhs.gov.
We've gotten a handful of questions about product code assistance for FDA product codes. Those who have even worked in the agency know that product coding can at times be more of an art than a science. But if you need assistance with your product code, please feel free to reach out to local FDA. All of that information can be found on fda.gov if you search for imports. We have a very newly redesigned import page that has a link to the various contact points for your local FDA within the district where you're importing through. If they cannot be of assistance or if there is some disagreement between the various FDA districts, you may email the Division of Import Operations at FDA Imports Inquiry, all one word, at fda.hhs.gov.
Someone is asking, they are a broker, they were told they had to enter an FEI number for a brokerage firm with each entry. Is that correct? Are customs brokers required to have an FEI? So FEIs are not mandatory, whether you're a broker, manufacturer, etc. It's optional data element. They're not required for a broker. You're not even required to put that as an entity. We ask for your, as a broker, your contact information, but FEI number is not required to be transmitted from you. Other people are asking about the supplemental guide. So the title page says November 30th. That was the official day we published it. But the saved version says, the title page still says November 30th, but the saved document says November 28th. December 28th. Yes, that's the right version. We made some edits to the change log. So the title page says November 30th, part says December 28th. Someone's asking for the PG19 2021 using the PK. Will this additional entity be added to the already required entities, or will it replace one of the existing ones? I'm not sure I understand the question. You can add a PK to something that's already required, like you would have you could have 2 PG21s for that, or you could just, under an optional entity, put it, but and it's kind of confusing to talk through. If you email me, I can work with you and create a sample of how it should be sent. Some people are asking what to do if you don't know the food facility registration number, and can you put unknown for that? You cannot put the code unknown for a food facility registration number, but if you talk to your software vendor and refer to our supplemental guide, there are some different scenarios where if you're unable to obtain the food facility registration, you can select a specific code. So talk to your software vendor or email ACE support if you're not sure what codes you can use if you cannot obtain the food facility registration number or it's unknown.
A question here related to, does FDA have a de minimis value for filing? There has been some guidance out in the public forum for some time, 25 years or so, that has not been updated since the new value for de minimis was put in place with TIFTIA. There is technically no de minimis value for filing. FDA relies on the entry requirements for CBP, although we encourage the electronic filing of entries for a faster and more efficient process for FDA. To that end, we will be coming out with new de minimis / Section 321 guidance in the future.
Someone's asking, is the role of PK mandatory or optional? It's optional, but we highly encourage it. PK means that you're sending me the broker's information. If FDA has a question about the entry, we're going to get it answered faster if you actually give us who to call, a number to call, and email. So it's optional, but we ask that you please send it. Someone asked, can we look up or verify food facility registration numbers? No, those numbers are proprietary. You can't query those. Someone asked if Appendix R, the appendix for the CATER that lists all the intended use codes, will be updated to match FDA. Yes. Someone says, when is the FEI or DUNS number required? That's optional, so it's not required.
Question here about what does the specific FD flags mean? What does FD 1, 2, 3, etc. mean? If you go to the same website, fda.gov, and search for the imports page, there is a sub-page that talks about what each FD flag means. FD1 being a product that is not a food, but may or may not be FDA regulated. 2 means it's not a food, but it is FDA regulated. 3 being that it may or may not be a food or other FDA regulated product, and 4 being that it is a food.
So someone asked, why did FDA do away with the query ability for product codes through ABI? The reason we did away with that query is because it wasn't updated in real time. We are working on an API that would interface the actual product code builder to your software. So if we delete product code, add a product code, everything would be in real time, and there wouldn't be anyone that was getting a reject because they were using an outdated product code or they didn't have access to new product codes. So that's something that we have on our side on the pipeline, but the reason we deleted it was because the product code builder right now is the most accurate and real-time source of information. Someone asked, what is the process for updating or correcting FDA product codes? I'm not sure exactly what you mean, but if you got a reject, an FDA reject that says invalid product code, you would need to work with your ABI rep and send a corrected version of the entry. If you get an FDA reject, you can send a corrected version. If you ever get an FDA reject, you should contact ACE support, and we can help you determine why it was rejected, if it was for the product code, what exactly was wrong about the product code, and help you transmit the right information.
Peggy, did you say it is being recorded?
So there's a question on here about the filer having access to all of the appropriate information. Specifically, they bring up affirmation of compliance. The expectation and the reason we're doing the outreach is so that if the communication stream does not exist or needs to be enhanced, where the importer provides all of the correct and accurate information for the firms and products to the filer, that we help to assist and open that line of communication. As the expectation is for CBP, I would expect is for FDA that when the entry is transmitted, that there's complete and accurate information.
AJ, there's a question you may be able to help with. It says, are you able to confirm that a formal entry is required regardless of value when it's an FDA-regulated product?
It's a good question. The answer to that one is no. CBP determines the entry type and, I guess, category that is required based on their regulations. FDA can request through CBP that a formal entry is filed for a given shipment based on our planned regulatory follow-up. However, there is no FDA requirement that all entries of FDA-regulated products are formal entries.
So someone else is asking, in a case where an affirmation of compliance is mandatory and they just don't have it, what happens if your importer does not have the affirmation and there's other lines of unregulated FDA products? Will it hold the entire shipment and I'm not able to transmit the entry at all? For FDA, you have to have, to be able to transmit electronically in ACE, you have to have everything that's mandatory. If your importer doesn't have an AFC, it could be possible that it falls under a different import scenario. If not, you should contact us. We can try to work with you. But to file electronically, you must have all of the mandatory data elements. Someone's asking about the requirements for tanning beds. I'm not sure about your question. What would be required in addition to the accession number? Send that to ACE support, and I'll link you up with CDRH and try to get a response.
Another question here about, is FDA data available to other agencies with respect to ACE? That would depend on whether, one, the other partner government agency has a regulatory requirement to have that data or to get that data, and or two, if FDA has an information sharing agreement with the other agency. But one of the benefits of ACE is so that entry data that is similar across partner government agencies is submitted only once and then parsed out to the various agencies who have that requirement.
Another question that I see is something that's a raw material for pharmaceuticals, something that would be a pharmaceutical necessity, require an intended use code. No, pharmaceutical necessities do not require an intended use code. Someone also asked us providing a unique ID number with ACE PGA expedite FDA review. So if you're talking about an FEI number or a DUNS number, if you're providing one that's correct, then yes, it has the possibility to expedite our review and may also help you get an automatic may proceed. A lot of people are still asking about, can we get a copy of the webinar? How will we get it? CBP will be sending out the information of how to access the recorded webinar.
So given the technical issues that we had, we will look at the video or the recording to make sure that it's of acceptable quality. We also closed caption the webinar as well, so that should also be available. Another question here, what happens if an article of sunglasses is accidentally coded as a drug, but the information needs to be updated to correctly code it as a device? I see Jessica is scrolling through slides here. But presumably, if you have a medical device and being coded as a drug, you would not be able to submit all of the required data elements for that product, and thus you would get a reject back from CBP and or FDA, indicating that the required information was not submitted. Then you would be able to retransmit the entry with the corrected information.
I'm seeing a couple of questions asking when exactly are these things going to be in effect. So the changes like the updated intended use code and AFCs and all the changes that we reviewed, those will be in effect on beginning February 9th. CBP usually is complete deployments around 7 a.m. So between 5 to 6 a.m. and 7 is when they'll be putting this in. So when you get to work on Monday, if you get to work after 7, or sorry, on February 9th on Thursday, if you get to work after 7 a.m. these Eastern time, these will already be in effect. And one point I did not mention, someone did send a question, is this going to affect our software? So probably, because there are new intended use codes, if you're used to actually keying in the numbered code or even choosing from a drop-down the numbered code for intended use code, those are going to be different. So if you're used to choosing a certain one, or if they're all auto-populated because you have the same entry every week and nothing's changed but it's prescription drug, that intended use code changed. So you'll need to talk with your software vendor about if you'll need to key it in and change it, or if it's that entry that you have every week where everything's the same, if they update it on the back end. So just make sure for all of these changes that we discussed today, you're in contact with your software vendor and you are aware if there are going to be changes, you know what to expect, and so you're prepared for February 9th. Communication with your software vendor is key. And if your software vendor has questions, they can reach out to ACE Support, and we'll work with you all together to make sure we can help you be prepared as much as possible. Someone's asking, is UNK still allowed as the qualifier for a listing number? So if you don't know the device listing number, can I put LST and then unknown? No. After February 9th at 7 a.m., that's no longer accepted. You can only use UNK as an intended use code, not as an affirmation of compliance.
Product codes being a popular topic today, maybe they always are, but talking about the fact that many product codes are updated. And yes, FDA, our subject matter experts, routinely look at product codes under their purview to make sure that they have what they need from a data collection perspective. That information is then given to our import compliance systems branch side, who then works with CBP to make sure that all of the new product codes or updated product codes are available for use, as well as in our product code builder on our side. Another question related to product codes. What about issues where an incorrect product code is discovered during an audit, but however it was not rejected during the entry transmission process to FDA? At this time, there is then no ability to correct the product code to FDA. If there was an issue of concern where the entry needed to be updated, whether it was via product code or some other reason. At this point, if it's between 5 days and the time of arrival, that information cannot be updated. If the entry was transmitted 5 days or sooner, then if it was transmitted 5 days or later than arrival, entry changes can be made up until that 5-day window. FDA is looking at the ability to make changes later in the entry submission process, even when accepted by FDA. However, that's still under discussion internal to the agency and will then have to be taken to CBP as well for the appropriate changes.
And someone is asking for the importer of record. Do I just give the phone number, or do I also need to give the email? You need to give name, email, and phone number for the importer.
A question here about FDA notices of action and whether or not they will be available on the ACE portal at some point. It's an excellent suggestion. At this point, that is not an enhancement we are addressing right now. However, we are looking at using FDA's ITAC system. I'm blanking on what the acronym stands for, ITACS, to send notices to the affected parties. At this point, it is only a pilot. However, we are looking at ramping that up in the very near future. You can find more information about ITACs at that same website, fda.gov, and search for import. And look for the main import page, and you can find ITACs from there, or you can just query ITACs at fda.gov.
Someone is asking, is there a way that we as brokers can see our predict score so we can improve our entries? Unfortunately, no. The predict score is something that's proprietary to FDA and how we assess risk. If you're interested as a filer or as an importer on how your filer can improve the data that you send, you can discuss that with your district during filer evaluations about things you can do to improve or things that were transmitted that were incorrect. But we don't disclose information about predict. Someone else is asking, can CBP send a CSMS to confirm that the changes went into effect? Yes, we'll work with CBP and make sure that everything about the deployment is communicated. Once they usually send out a CSMS that they're having an outage due to the deployment, so we'll make sure when they confirm that they're back up, they send that these changes are in place. Someone else is asking for medical device initial importer is required in PG-19. Some device initial importers have registration numbers, but DII is not currently listed as an option for affirmation of compliance. How do we report the DII registration? So if the DII that's registered, if that's an FEI number, when you send the PG-19, you can send that FEI number. You can use that link that I sent in the presentation of how you can query the FEI number for medical devices. If the registration number is not an FEI number, you don't need to send it. That's why it's not part of the message set. Someone asked, are we going to be able to transmit documents to FDA through DIS? You have to transmit through ITACs. That's FDA's system for now. Someone's pointing out very adeptly, ITACs is Import Trade Auxiliary Communication System, AJ.
Thank you, much appreciated. There's been a couple of questions about LED lights and whether they are FDA-regulated products or not. Yes, they are. Based on the product itself, I think we need more discussion on what exactly it would be, whether it's a radiation-emitting product and or a medical device. But yes, LED lights are at least radiation-emitting products and would require FDA entry data.
So someone is asking about the status of corrections and how could FDA data be revised after it's already been submitted to FDA? How can we contact FDA to reject our entry? So we don't have any mechanism where you can call FDA and say, hey, reject this, so we can fix it. If you notice that something's wrong, if FDA already has the entry, you'll have to cancel it and refile it. If it's something small, maybe you could contact your port and the entry reviewer could just update it. But if something like you filed a disclaim and it was FDA regulated products, we're not going to fix that. We have no mechanism for fixing that. You would have to cancel and refile it. So someone asked, can you please reiterate about the PK and when it has to be used? Is it for all FDA entries? So PK stands for the filer contact information. We encourage you to send it to us, but it's not mandatory. The reason we encourage you to send it to us is because if there's an issue with the entry, as we all know, everyone's in a hurry. So the quickest way that we can reach out to you, the quickest way that we respond is if you actually give us a phone number or email that we can say, hey, this is wrong. When you upload your documents, make sure this is what you send. So it's not mandatory, but it's optional. If you can send it, we ask that you send the filer's information.
Question about who do we contact within FDA to reject our entry? At this point, any rejects are system only. We cannot manually reject entries after the fact. However, that is under discussion with respect to future functionality within FDA.
Someone's asking, will the recent White House memo regarding delay of implementation of new regulations affect your implementation schedule? We are still on track for implementing the rest of these changes on February 9th.
Another question related to HTS codes. Does the prior notice flag based on the HTS code and ACE? Yes, as an ACS. The FD flag, whether it's a 3 or 4, indicating it may require prior notice for an FD3 or does require prior notice for an FD4, is based on the HTS code. Again, if you have questions about the HTS code and the flag, the FD flag associated with it, I will be providing the contact information within the Division of Import Operations.
AJ, there's a couple of questions about the manufacturer. What I discussed was a site-specific location that made the last substantial change of the product, but there's a couple of questions saying, is it the legal manufacturer or the actual manufacturing site where the operations occur?
So within FDA, we always talk about the smokestack location for the product. If there was an issue, where would we go to find what happened with that product? So I believe in the example that was just given, that it would be the actual location where it was produced.
Looking just to see if there's any other questions that we haven't got to yet.
There's a question related to when reporting value for FDA data, should that value take into account additional considerations such as any additions for packing or deductions for insurance or freight? For the purposes of transmitting value to FDA, it is acceptable to transmit the value which was submitted to CBP for the indicated articles, given any allowances to deduct for various charges. That being said, FDA prefers the value from the invoice declared for the purposes of FDA entry data. The one issue that we at times have run into is that based on our discussions with CBP, the sum of all PGA line values may not exceed the CBP entry value.
AJ, another question you may be able to help with. So as you're familiar, the final rule made importer of record contact information mandatory, and it can be either a person or a corporation. We have a couple questions saying, can the broker put their name, email, and phone number in that field instead of putting the importer of record?
The intent is for FDA to get the contact information of the most responsible party in the shipment. Certainly the filer could also be the importer of record. They could be one and the same entity. However, FDA's expectation would be it's the contact information for the importer of record.
Just checking to see if there's any other questions that we can get to. See a couple more coming in.
Just so everyone's clear, there was a comment to please confirm the time frame for FDA changes in an entry. That is up until 5 days prior to arrival for the article. Anytime after 5 days, the entry may only be changed if the line or entry has been rejected by FDA. Like I said earlier, we are considering moving that time frame closer to and or at / post arrival. However, at that time, that cannot be accepted by FDA. So at this point, unless the entry is rejected, changes may only be made up until that 5-day window prior to arrival.
Someone's writing in about an intended use code 180.014. That's import of a device for non-clinical use, bench testing. It says they are being asked for AFC codes. I'm not sure who's asking you for AFC codes. If it's either your software that's triggering it incorrectly, or CBP is rejecting it incorrectly, or if you just mean that someone at the port is asking for it. I'm not sure what you mean, but systematically it's not required. He's saying FDA at the port. If you send us an email, you may have to provide documentation showing that it's for clinical research or for non-clinical use, bench testing, so they know that they don't need to ask you for that. But if you're sending the documentation saying it's for bench testing and they're asking you for AFCs that you don't have, send an email to FDA Imports Inquiry, and we can make the port aware. They may just need to see the documentation again that it's going for bench testing. And when you file that type of entry, when you do the import description, you could put X product for bench testing or customer evaluation, and then you could go ahead and upload the docs that show where it's going. If the delivered to party shows that it's going, that helps the interviewer know. Will the use of the prior notice transmitter, prior notice submitter, will local FDA offices utilize this data for contacting the broker for remote filed entries? So for the prior notice, when we pull the contact information, we're going to first look for a PK, which is a filer's information. If it's not there, but you transmitted a prior notice transmitter, if it's a food entry, we'll try to use that information. So yeah, that we would have access to the prior notice transmitter information. If you didn't submit a PK, we would use that as the contact information if it was a food. Other people are asking, are you going to post these Q&A? Yes, we'll try to provide Q&A and get CDC to send it out once we can write all the questions and answers. AJ, we have a question that says, is the report sending the notice of action to the importer or the broker only?
So historically, and at least the expectation is for now that FDA will continue to send the notices of action to the importer. Historically, FDA has also sent the notice to the consignee and filer. Given the language in the final rule, FDA's only requirement is to send it to the importer of record. However, we will consider sending to the filer and consignee in the future as well. However, the importer of record is the most responsible party for the shipment and should be able to provide that information to the other parties within the entity or the entry as well.
A couple of people are asking if the device listing number is queryable. No, that's proprietary. You would need to work with your importer to obtain that information. That's not something that FDA has publicly available. AJ, a question that I know we've seen this before. What is the procedure to clear a carnet that has FDA-regulated products since it cannot be transmitted in ACE? Do we need to have proof of a may proceed for a carnet?
I would have to take that question back, I think, and look at more of the specifics of the shipment. I'm not aware of CBP and their status of accepting carnets electronically. If they cannot be submitted electronically, like any shipment of FDA-regulated product, we would expect local CBP to provide that information to local FDA to make a determination on admissibility.
Someone's asking, how do we determine if a product is considered natural state or processed food? We have a definition we can send you. If you email ACE support or you contact the Prior Notice Center, we can send you the definition. You can send us the product that you have in question, and we can help you determine if it's natural state or prior notice, or processed. Usually natural state means however it's found in nature with no or minimal processing. But we can send you the definition if you contact ACE support. A lot of people are asking, you guys are writing in the questions. They want to be able to, I guess, ask the question and have a conversation. There is a weekly trade call at 2 o'clock every Thursday. FDA does join the call, so if you have FDA-specific questions, that's more of a forum for discussion where you could ask the questions there. You can also always email or call our ACE support, and hopefully they can put you in contact with someone who, if you want to just have a conversation about a specific scenario or ask a couple questions. So one question, it says, it was stated earlier that prototypes and components of prototypes may not require FDA reporting. Who would we contact? So I think what you heard was I asked AJ, can you help me if this will require FDA? And he said may not, as in he may not be able to answer now, not that they may not require FDA. If you contact FDA Imports Inquiry, I'll go back to that slide and show it now. Send us all the documentation on whatever prototype you're asking about. We will work with the Center for Medical Devices to determine if it is regulated by FDA and requires to be filed or not. So, sorry, one more slide. FDA Imports Inquiry at fda.hhs.gov. For medical device, does the model number have to be provided? No, that's not mandatory data. How do we register for the weekly trade call? I think they just sent an invite. I think it was via CSMS. If you're not on that, email ACE support and just say, can I have the info for the weekly trade call? It's hosted by CVP, but we'll get you the information and forward you the number. Let's see. Someone asked, was intended use code 180.006 removed? Yes. Someone's asking, what is the most common rejection for medical items? So if it's a medical device, one is the missing entities, because you have to give 5 entities. You have to give manufacturer, shipper, importer, delivered to party, and you also have to give the device initial importer. And you have to select the correct intended use, and based on the intended use, there's usually affirmations required. So you would have to submit the affirmations and submit them in the correct format. Those are the common areas we see rejects and questions about for medical devices. Okay, I'm repeating it because someone sent me the information. We have the number for the CBP Thursday trade call. Thank you, Connie, for sending this. The trade call number is 877-336-1828. Again, 877-336-1828. And the access code is 612-421-4. And the trade call is hosted every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, one more time, the number is 877-336-1828. Access code is 612-421-14. So that's at 2 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday. Usually lasts about an hour. If you're having any issues, this is specifically for ACE entries, ACE requirements for FDA or any of the PGAs. Usually a representative from each PGA is on and you can ask your questions. And yes, that is East Coast time, 2 p.m.
I've seen a couple of questions about whether or not optical computer mice require FDA entry data. The answer is yes. As a laser-containing product, even though they are not medical devices, they are light-emitting products.
Someone's asking, is there some type of field to annotate FTZ withdrawal? So items that are going into an FTZ, you submit the prior notice when it's going in. So therefore, when it's coming out of the FTZ, you don't need to provide your prior notice information. And the way that you do that, you would have to talk, I'm not sure if the person asking is a filer or a software vendor, you would do that by annotating that it's an FTZ. If it's a type 26, that information is obtained from CDBP entry level. If it's a 21 withdrawal, you need to work with your software vendor, and the record is called PG30. There's a way to annotate the FTZ firm's code, and that's how we would know not to require the prior notice. So if you're withdrawing from an FTZ, talk to your software vendor and ask if you need to send the firm's code. Someone also asked, why is the FTZ firms code now within all the chapters? If it's, it used to only be in food, now it's in other chapters. So it's in other chapters, so FDA gets that. It's an entry type 21. That's the reason we have that. So it's a way to just tell us, even if it's not for prior notice, it's still telling us that it's an entry type 21, and it gives us the firm's code. Someone's telling me that I may have transposed the numbers for the access code for the trade. I'm opening up the official invite. Again, the phone number is 877-336-1828. Password is, access code is 612-4214. If you can't get in, just email ACE support. We'll get you the right number and forward you the invite. Someone's asking, when you're correcting an FDA entry, can you add additional lines? So you have to talk to your client rep about this because they know more about the corrections functionality than I do. And if your client rep doesn't give you a specific answer, I can get you another client rep that works with us in the ACE business office. I believe when you send an FDA correction, you have to send every FDA line under that tariff line. So if you were putting additional lines under that tariff line, I think that would be allowed, but please confirm with your client rep on the CA corrections functionality. AJ, someone's asking if cloth wraps that are filled, it's basically a bag that's filled with herbs and grains, required to file FDA. So the HTS is flagged FD3.
So yeah, I think we need to know more about the product itself, what it's being used for. There have been some rather interesting uses for similar products in the recent past. But yes, as an FD3 product, it may or may not be an article of food. It may be another product regulated by FDA, or it may not be an FDA-regulated product at all. Most likely, given the information presented here, it is most likely a food product, and as FD3, it would require both prior notice and FDA entry data. But if you'd like to discuss more specifically, Jessica has the FDA imports inquiry at fda.hhs.gov email address up here.
Someone's asking, can you send an FDA correction if you put the wrong shipper for your entity for FDA? So it depends on how much of an impact this was. If this is like a 100-line entry and you put the wrong shipper on all 100 lines, you should probably cancel and refile. But if it's just one line that you have a shipper, you could call the port and see if they would make the update for you. Otherwise, you'd have to cancel and refile.
I'm going to put on my Frank hat for a second. How does CBP know a Type 21 is a warehouse entry from a foreign trade zone as opposed to one from a non-foreign trade zone? There are different entry types for warehouse entries. The Type 21 is for general warehouse entries, whereas those coming from a foreign trade zone are under Type 26, which I believe Jessica referenced earlier.
Someone's asking, are the Appendix D codes good for all FDA programs? I'm trying to remember what Appendix D is. A lot of the appendices, like Appendix R and other appendices that have like our affirmations of compliance, those are still getting updated. For the most accurate and recent information for FDA, it's always in our supplemental guide. So like if you see an affirmation of compliance listed or some other code that's listed in another document, but it's not listed in our supplemental guide, always go with our supplemental guide for the latest information. The latest units of measure, I'm not sure what day they updated it. I know we gave CBP our units of measure per 2.5. I'll have to check the date on it. If it's after the date we publish, it's probably not up in sync. But I know we gave them, so they should be in sync soon. Someone says, do you have an updated tips for importing FDA products? Yes. We're trying to get that posted to FDA.gov this week, but I have one correction to make to the slides I shared today. Once I make the correction and send it to CBP, I'll also send the tip sheet so CBP can post that or send it, however they're going to do that, so everyone can have access to that. Is DII always required for sunglasses or any medical device? DII is always required. It's not an affirmation. It's a entity. Yes, DII would always be required for medical devices.
All right, as we run up against our 3 o'clock window, at least East Coast time, I'll look at one more, and that is there some sort of database that shows FDA rulings kind of like CROSS? The answer, at least at this point, is no. We have talked about for a long time developing some sort of system that memorializes our decisions or determinations on various issues. However, based on competing priorities, that has not happened yet. We hope to in the future at some point. Jessica, do you have anything else on your end that you want to address?
Yeah, I have two things. I got an email from a client rep, thanks Mike, regarding entry type 21, whether it's coming to a bond warehouse or FTZ withdrawal. CBP is saying it has specific codes on the ACE cargo release specific to move from an FTZ to a warehouse, and in the PG data, the PG30 helps reflect the firm's code if it's an FTZ withdrawal. So Scott, I'm not sure if that answered your question. If not, email me. Honestly, it's been a while since I worked on the FTZ stuff, so I'm having a hard time remembering on the spot, but I can try to get you an answer to your question. Last one that I'll answer, something I just saw that came in. I have let's see. The question is for medical device or the device initial importer. Why is that a mandatory entity for medical devices if every medical device may not have a DII? So they actually put a note for that, and it says, it's in our supplemental guide. If you're looking at the document page, it's page 238. under PG-19 for medical device in 2.5, it says, if there's no DII that must register, the name and the address of the U.S.-based firm receiving the goods is required. Reference 21 CFR 807.3. If you have a question, email me. I can send you that link. But again, if there's no DII that must register, enter the name of the U.S. firm that's receiving the goods in the DII field. I'm still seeing a lot more stuff for sunglasses. Please email ACE support and FDA imports inquiry on the same email. If you have questions either about what's required for sunglasses or are sunglasses subject to FDA or components of sunglasses, and if it's either the manufacturer of the lens or the finished product, email us and we'll help you with those specific scenarios. Again, always email us if you have a question or call us. If you're not getting answer to your question, email us again. You can email me or you can email FDA Imports Inquiry. We'll try to get you the help that you need. So I don't have anything. AJ, anything else from you?
I want to thank everybody for their time and participation here today. If you worked on the pilot with us, thank you very much, and we look forward to continued collaboration using the resources that Jessica discussed as we transition to making ACE a better product for everyone across the board. And I also want to thank Frank and Peggy for all of your assistance as well throughout the process.
Sorry about the audio. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care all.